Picture a 2-year-old child exploring the house. When he comes across a socket, he does what seems natural. Tries to touch it. But when his parents see him, they stop him, taking him away. A couple moments later, he tries to touch it again, and just like before, his parents stop him. After he does this a couple more times, he starts not to touch the socket. This is the magic of learning. Learning is arguably one of the most essential parts of our lives. From the moment we're born, we start taking in information, gaining new skills, and expanding our understanding of the world around us. It's through learning that we grow, adapt, and ultimately succeed. There's a couple different methods or ways of learning that we use. We learn from our parents, from books we read, from our teachers, and even our observations of the world around us. What we learn from these traditional methods of learning end up defining our lives and who we become. But what if I told you that there's something just as important as learning, if not more so? What if I told you that sometimes the key to creating real impact lies not in what we learn, but how we question what we learn, or how we unlearn? Let's take the example of Galileo Galilei. Galileo was an Italian astronomer, physicist, and engineer, and he lived in the 16th century. As he grew up, what he learned from his teachers, the books around him, and even his religion was that the Earth was at the center of our universe. But instead of accepting the information he received from these traditional methods of learning, he chose to question them. He chose to unlearn what was being taught to him and instead follow his own pursuits of learning about the world. If he went out into the world, observing the stars and skies, reading about distant philosophers and their ideas, instead of merely listening to those around him. Eventually, he argued that the sun was at the center of our universe, and we know now that he was correct. This was the beginning of him making an impact on the world around him. Unlearning is what led to him starting something completely new, and he's now one of the most widely regarded scientists, taught in every science course and curriculum at school. So, my real topic today is the art of unlearning. Unlearning is the process of letting go of old ways of thinking that hold us back and being open to new perspectives and possibilities. And in my opinion, it's a lot harder than learning. For most of my life, I prided myself on my certainty. But as I grew older, I began to realize that this certainty was nothing more than a facade, a shield I had created to protect myself from the discomfort of uncertainty. As a high school student, I felt the weight of expectations bearing down on me. The pressure to excel academically, to have all the right answers, to balance school with extracurriculars, and to know exactly where my future was headed. And with all of these expectations, I began to realize that I would pretend I knew what was happening when I actually didn't really. I'll never forget the day that I walked into my chemistry class feeling confident and prepared, only to be blindsided by a concept I couldn't wrap my head around. For the longest time, I believed that admitting I didn't know something was a sign of weakness, and that perfectionism was the key to success. So when I faced this challenge, I was stumped. I looked around at the room and saw all of my classmates nodding along with the teacher's explanation, and a sinking feeling formed in the pit of my stomach. Panic set in as I realized I was the only one in the room who didn't understand. For weeks, I pored over lecture notes and textbooks, hoping to find the answers on my own. I was too afraid to ask for help and too ashamed to admit my ignorance. But the more I searched for those answers, the more elusive they became. It wasn't until I mustered the courage to raise my hand and ask for help that I began to see things differently. I expected judgment or ridicule, but instead, I was faced with understanding and compassion. Previously, I was trapped in a cycle of perfectionism, a relentless pursuit of knowledge at the expense of my own well-being. But when I opened up, shared my struggles, and asked for help, I found that the world was actually much kinder. I expected judgment, but I didn't get it. At that moment, I realized that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it's a strength. By admitting that I didn't know something, I opened myself up to the possibility of learning, of growth, of connection. I decided to unlearn my perfectionist tendencies, and I let go of the need to be perfect, and I embraced the beauty of imperfection. The lesson I learned that day was simple yet profound. It's okay to not know everything. In fact, it's more than okay. It's liberating. It was a revelation that shook me to my core, a realization that I had spent years clinging to habits that no longer served me, clinging to beliefs that stifled my growth, and clinging to assumptions that clouded my judgment. Once I let go of the need to be perfect, I found that it was actually much easier than ever to learn, to grow, to adapt, to make mistakes, and to even face the threat of failure. So I made a decision to embark on a journey of unlearning, to shed these layers of conditioning that told me that I needed to be perfect, and to instead embrace uncertainty. To unlearn, we need to cultivate curiosity, to approach the world with an open mind. We need to let go of our need to always be right and to have all the answers, and instead embrace the unknown with curiosity. So, let's take a venture into the heart of my mom's home bakery. But let me warn you, this story isn't so sweet. This was a clash of creativity, a clash between my mom and me, and the lesson we learned about letting go of control. It all started with a special order, a custom cake for a client's milestone celebration. Now, my mother, ever the grand spirit, wanted to make a cake that was grand, bold details, intricate design, something that would dazzle and delight. But I demanded that we stick to something simple, elegant, timeless, something that the client expected. So when we were tasked with bringing this masterpiece to life and we gathered in the kitchen, our visions for this cake couldn't have been more different. I was adamant that we stick to a traditional design, while my mom wanted to go for something grander. And these two things would not meet in the middle. We were both stuck in our ways, refusing to meet, and the time passed by. As we debated back and forth, tensions rose and tempers flared. Each of us was convinced that our way was correct, that only we held the key to cake-making perfection. But as the hours ticked by and the cake remained unfinished, it became painfully clear that something had to give. In a moment of frustration, I realized that my stubbornness was standing in the way of progress. My insistence on being right was preventing us from creating anything at all. So, to create something truly special, I decided to give in. I let go of my need to be right. I took a deep breath and a leap of faith. I made the decision to let go of control, to trust in my mom's expertise and creativity. Now, did I really have a choice in the matter? No. My mom was going to do it anyway, and I decided to stick along for the ride. But I found that something truly magical happened. Freed from constraints, we began to collaborate, to compromise, to bring both of our ideas into something greater. We found common ground in the middle of tradition and innovation. We found a sweet spot and crafted a cake that honored both the client's wishes and showcased my mom's artistic flair. Once I decided to unlearn this tendency of me being right, I found that I was actually much more successful than I was previously. So I used this example to teach myself a valuable lesson. I had taught myself that I was always right, that I knew how to do things best. But this way of thinking limited my creativity and didn't allow me to understand other people's perspectives. Once I chose to unlearn this way of thinking, I was able to see how many more perspectives there really are. I was able to see my mom's vision and her way of thinking. So unlearning the way of thinking that I previously had allowed me to change the way that I approach my life. It helped me improve my relationships with my family as well, and be able to understand their perspectives. So this journey of unlearning led me to more benefits than I ever thought I could have imagined. And we can see the impact of people that have unlearned in the world around us. Let's take the example of Yannick Sinner. Yannick is an Italian tennis player. Now, if you ask any coach, trainer, or even recruiter, they'll tell you that to be a truly great tennis player at the professional level, you need to start as young as 4 or 6 years old. Many will even say that starting to play tennis after the age of 10 means that you will never be able to be great at a professional level. After all, look at the records of Grand Slam winners previously. All of them started playing extremely young, and they spend almost every hour of every day at tennis academies, training to be the greatest. The traditional way of learning to play tennis is to spend hours on the court, doing drill after drill, trying to master the skills that come with the game. But Yannick Sinner was an exception, and he chose to question this traditional means of learning to play tennis. In fact, Yannick didn't even want to play tennis professionally as a kid. It was his third choice, and he only started true training on the tennis court when at the age of 13. Now, despite the fact that he had been taught he was way too old to start playing tennis professionally, he didn't let that stop him. He chose to unlearn this traditional means of learning to play tennis, and instead, he decided to push himself harder than anybody else. Now, at only 22 years of age, he's ranked as world number 2 in tennis. His example has changed the way that tennis training for kids has been imagined by all sorts of experts. His story inspires many players around the world who have been told they are too old to start and have lost their hopes and gained disappointment. Instead, he shows them that anything is possible. His decision to unlearn the traditional means of learning to play tennis has taught so many kids that they are able to do more than the expectations that adults put on them. He's brought a huge change to the game of tennis. Unlearning led him to make a real, meaningful impact on the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, whether you choose to embark on this journey of unlearning or not, be warned that it will be difficult. But to create true impact in the world, unlearning is necessary, because real learning only starts once you begin to unlearn. Thank you.